All right. I think we're officially live here. Turn off the music. Thank you. All right. Welcome to GitOps the Planet. I am your host, Dan Garfield. I am Chief Open Source Officer and co-founder of CodeFresh, and I am an Argo maintainer. You can see that we're ready to do this episode because I have my mug. I'm ready to kick off. I've got my my proper drink in hand. So with that, I want to bring in our special guest today, who is Darren Shepherd. Darren, are you with us?
Hopefully. You hear me?
Yes, I hear you well.
I'm on Linux and I just got the audio working right now. The stream started and I'm like, crap, I can't hear anything at all. So perfect.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad we got you. Let's see. Hopefully the stream is running okay. Please let us know in the chat if there are any issues. I think my internet might be running just a little bit slow, even though I'm on wired, but hopefully that won't stick around. So anyway, Darren, thanks for joining us on GitOps the Planet. And to introduce you, and I think many people are familiar with you, but you I think you're on your third company that you've started. You were a co-founder at Rancher, went through acquisition with Suse. Now you started a new company called Acorn Labs. And I think you had done something before that as well. Is that right?
No. So this is my second startup. So, I mean, I've been kind of working in I've been working in the IS space for a while before doing Rancher. But yeah, so this is the second time I've done a startup. So yeah, so starting all over again. It's just as hard as the last time.
Got it. Okay. And I'm pretty blown away by this because looking at Rancher, and it looks like kind of all the co-founders at Rancher, you've all gotten the band back together to do another startup together. And I'm 6 years in since we started CodeFresh, and the idea of going and starting another one makes me feel very, very tired when I think about it. But you guys got the band back together and decided to do it again.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is like our history actually goes back before Rancher too. So it's like all the kind of there's about like 9 or 10 of us really that kind of all got started or all got to know each other way back before Rancher. There was cloud.com who did Cloud Stack. There was the co-founders of that company. They were working with a group of us at GoDaddy. We were their customer. So it's like we worked together way back then, and then through various things or whatever, we ended up a bunch of us leaving GoDaddy, and they had left. They had been acquired at that time as Citrix. They had left Citrix, and we formed Rancher. So it's like we were already kind of working as in some fashion before Rancher, and then we did Rancher, and I mean, really just a blast. I love working with the team, and in the end, things went, well with Rancher. And so, we had an opportunity to kind of do it all over again. And so, yeah, kind of got the team back together. And we're excited to try it again. It's hard. We're upping the ante because so now, so before what we were doing in Rancher, from what most people kind of will know me from or know the other guys, Shane, Shannon, Will, are the other co-founders, and then there's some other like Bill. I can't name them all. Craig, Vince. They're the kind of the other engineers and stuff. But what we were doing before was heavily like cluster administration, like helping people run Kubernetes clusters. So that's what we were doing at Rancher. And so now we're kind of moving up the stack, and we're like, okay, well, people are getting better at running clusters. That's a little bit more of an established industry. But we still think there's a lot of issues with running workloads on clusters, specifically how to get like developers productive and moving that workflow from like that workflow from developers to the end, actually in production. And so we're basically entering kind of like more the application or PaaS space, which is ridiculously hard. And so that's like what we're doing at Acorn. I'm not really here to like pitch you on Acorn and what we're doing, but just more rant about how terrible everything is. Did I lose you?
The whole No, sorry. I was just highlighting you because Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is interesting, and actually, I wanted to hear a little bit more about it because it seems like a lot of people have noticed that the workflow. It feels like people have noticed that there could be a better work, a little bit more stack aware, and I think this is essentially the flow that you're trying to enable with Acorn Labs. And so I would actually be thrilled if you want to take 2 minutes, you can share your screen and just introduce people to what you're doing with Acorn. I think it'd actually be really cool.
Well, oh, wow. Okay. So I'll probably screw this up because I wasn't even like, this is how unprepared I am.
And we don't have to. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, I'll see if I can actually. But let me kind of explain like kind of what like I'm like my thesis or whatever is that like, because if anyone who like follows me, I have this total love-hate relationship with Kubernetes. Like I think it's like this amazing platform. It's really good. I just can't stand using it. And so it's like, so the thing is like when you look at kind of like the history of like kind of this ecosystem and stuff, it's like we have Docker that came out and it was like super popular, just sparked kind of this creativity and developers loved it. And then we had this like this groundswell of developers wanting to use it everywhere. And then it comes at the operations side of like, well, how the heck do I run this? And so that's basically what like I think where we are like for like the last like almost like 7 years is how the hell do I run Kubernetes? And so it's like so much of like has been focused on basically just like, because I was like my previous company was running Kubernetes. And so it's like even things like GitOps is like it's all operational focused of like how do you run Kubernetes, how do you get workloads on it? It's all operations. So we spend so much time on the operational side that like in the process we kind of like to a certain degree kind of said like forget you developers. You know, it's like you guys like were the initial like drive of all this, but operations is more important. Let's get this all there and then we'll come back to you. So there's like this massive disconnect of like we've spent so much time running infrastructure and then kind of push developers and stuff kind of back towards like this wall of like, okay, you just still write your code and then we'll figure out somehow to package and get it deployed and whatever. So there's like this massive disconnect. And so it's like when I show you like Acorn and like I can, we can give it a shot to see if I can actually, I'll do some like just ad hoc because I don't mind. Like if anyone's watched me, like when I do, we do these like live meetups, we do everything like demoing and I screw up everything and I'm totally fine. Let me share my screen and I'll show you kind of the stuff that I'm doing with Acorn. Let me see, screen one. Oh, this is crappy. I think it's going to be screen one. Nope. Screen two. Oh, and I didn't even realize how long are we going to go? Because I can talk forever.
I mean, we've got 90 minutes. So
okay.
Plenty of time, hopefully.
So the idea of Acorn is like basically, let me see. I'll go to I'll start with a very simple application, like just kind of like a hello world. Okay. So the idea of Acorn is that like from a developer experience, it like should hopefully look a lot like kind of like Compose, like Docker Compose. Like I love the original Docker tooling. It was great. It had a great user experience. And then like, again, I feel like it's like it all fell apart once we got to operations. It's like, well, how the hell do you run this? It's like then Kubernetes came up and now we're just doing all this. So the idea is that like it should look kind of very similar experience to like Compose. So here it's like I'm defining some container I want to run, some image. These are some ports, some directories I want to share over for development. And then this is my laptop and things might be broken, but like so I can just like run this thing very easily in like a development mode. This is very similar to like Docker Compose up, where I just say, okay, Acorn run. Oh, you know what? Let me do this because again, I'm gonna run the development version, like kind of a dev version. Because okay, so this is
so
like
glad
actually.
I didn't tell you beforehand that we were gonna do this.
This is so. And I don't mind. Like if things break, it's this is life. This is like the life of developers or whatever. Is that like so you say like it's pulling this Docker image, which is why is it super slow? Well, I'll just keep talking. We'll see if it ever pulls. Normally, it doesn't.
It's probably prioritizing the video. Don't worry.
Yeah, hopefully. So the idea is that like when you do like Docker Compose up or whatever, it gives you this great kind of developer experience running containers and stuff. And so with Acorn, I can do that. I can just say like run this in an interactive mode, and then it'll just go and run this application. I don't think this is it's gonna work. Let me just like kill crap. Or we can just do this. We'll just I'll just wipe out everything.
Oh wow. Well, yeah, it seems like for a long time people have been talking about getting farther away from Kubernetes, where they're sort of like, I don't want developers to be involved in it. They don't get to find out how stuff is deployed. They just build something and then I do a bunch of magic and they don't worry about it. But this is sort of saying, no, actually, like bring it in and let's just have a better interface.
Yeah, and that's what I think it is, because it's like you look at like developer or like at Docker, for some reason that like sparked it. Like I hate this idea of like who is the developer, and like from an ops side, we're like, oh, the developer is like this Java code monkey who like we're just gonna put them over there. They don't, But you look at Docker was like super popular, and it's like Docker is a little lower level than what a lot of people would kind of characterize as what a developer would care about. So I think like we have a big misconception of who the developer and the end user is. But so like my only data point is like Docker was so successful, like was so popular, like there's something there. And so like I hate to characterize what a developer is and what they care about, because like all I know is like Docker was really popular. And so I'm kind of like just going off of that. Okay. So the thing is like, but what I definitely have seen is like with Kubernetes, the style of Kubernetes just is like very it doesn't resonate well with the developer, like kind of like that more Docker crowd. It doesn't resonate. And I saw that when we built Rio, was a project we did at Rancho, was like, it was supposed to be more like it was supposed to be like more app oriented. But we did it very much in a Kubernetes style. And I just saw that it just didn't work well. It just didn't like resonate very much with the kind of the end user. So we'll see if any of this ever works, because again, this was like just all ad hoc. I'll eventually figure it out. But yeah. So where was I going with this? Was that I really think that like we've built this amazing platform we've built this amazing platform with Kubernetes, but kind of the interface to it is kind of where we've failed to make this more productive. Is that like you can't take the Kubernetes interface, the style, the YAML, the verbosity, and then just say like, oh, I'm just going to create new CRDs and like that's going to solve it for the end user, like the more developer. It's like, no, we need a proper abstraction. Like we need to actually draw a pretty hard layer and say like, no, like this is going to be an app platform. We can take all the learnings of Kubernetes. We can take like all the learnings of Kubernetes, but then just put it into a different user experience. And that's what like Acorn's trying to do, is basically like take all the amazing things of Kubernetes, but like boil it more down to app level concepts and have this hard separation between like applications and application concerns and administrator and administrator concerns. Because what you see in Kubernetes today is that like, if I want to do a deployment, 90% of the parameters in a deployment are operational focused. Right? Like the developer largely cares about image, arguments, environment variables, not even scheduling. Scheduling is like all operations, right? So it's like the vast majority of the parameters, like they need to be separated. So you have a user side and an operation side. And so what Acorn's trying to do is like separate the user experience into this nice user experience that can be very application oriented, and then figure out how to do the operation side and basically inject in all the operations. So it's like, I can't have a user touching a deployment directly. It doesn't make any sense. So like I need a higher level abstraction where they can define their app level requirements. And then like I can bring in all of the operational crap at the end of the day. So yeah. So that like that's like the crap that I'm doing. Okay.
Yeah, like I've noticed that there's kind of a pattern that people have developed a little bit, which is essentially for they're like, oh, well, for development, we'll actually just use Docker Compose. We develop that way because it's easy for our developers to use, and they don't have to run a cluster, and then they'll toss it over the wall, and operations will figure out how to actually deploy and operationalize it, which feels, not great. Like, I mean, it feels like you're missing out on the value of Kubernetes in the first place. And this is also true within the home lab space. So last week we had on, there's this Discord community called Kubernetes at Home, and we had them on, and I run a Kubernetes cluster at home, and I do a home lab. And running Kubernetes at home is it's like a lot of work. Like, you have to manage nodes, and you have to care about storage and all these things that most people that are running home lab, if they are using Docker, they're using Docker Compose because it's really easy to just run on a single node. It's like.
And that was like, so when we first announced Acorn as a company, like that was kind of like the origin story was like during COVID. I'm like, I wanted to run a Minecraft server for my son, and it was like, oh, like I created K3s on the K3, so it's like I can run K3s, and then I can put Minecraft on there. And it was funny because like I started up K3s, like that's super simple if anyone's used K3s. And then I'm like, okay, now let me craft my deployment. And then I'm just like, oh, hell, I don't want to do this. Like, it's just too much. So I threw it away and went back to Docker Compose. And like, that's what I ran. And I'm just like, this is such nonsense because Docker Compose, again, is a great tool, but the problem is it's disconnected from the rest of the ecosystem. So it's like, and so as you're pointing out, so like, that's kind of what's happened right now is like on the developer side, it's like, yeah, I use Docker and Docker Compose and it's great. Then what you want to move forward, then it's like, oh, well, we actually have Helm charts for that. Like, it's completely disconnected. It's a different experience. And then what I've seen this trend in, let me kill Slack. What I've seen in this trend is that is with Kubernetes developer tools is it's like what they've done now is they say like, okay, well, you have this Kubernetes deployment, which was probably authored by like some more DevOps or Opsy team. Like they've come up with their Helm. It's usually Helm templates or, Helm charts. So it's like, what we're going to do is we're going to take this pre-authored Kubernetes deployment and then try to add some developer-y type experience to auto reload images and then get that running on the laptop. And so it's this like weirdly like crafted like thing where it's like, oh, well, somebody who knows more than you kind of sets this up and then gives it to you and you can press these 3 buttons to do your development. And it's like, I don't like as a developer, it's like, well, at the end of the day, like I do just need to like, I can be productive that way, but kind of like, I don't know. It's like, I want a more powerful tool. Like I want something where it's like, I can actually create the deployments. Like why do I, like, why is it so hard? So that's the thing is it's like, so much that I've seen in this kind of like developer, like trying to get developers more productive on Kubernetes has come from the operations side. It's like people who understand Kubernetes of trying to educate the developers of like, oh no, just, we'll put together. And to me, it's just like the whole mindset and everything's wrong. So it's like, what we're trying to do with Acorn is like, I'm at the end of the day, a developer who like happens to know a lot of infrastructure stuff. So it's like, but at the end of the day, I'm still just like, you're kind of like, you're an annoying developer who just wants things to run. So it's like, okay, let me build an experience with Acorn that like I enjoy developing, but I know at the end of the day can be operated, like it can actually move forward. And that's what we're doing with Acorn. If you want, so this thing finally ran, if you want to, sorry for that.
Oh yeah, please.
So the idea is like, so let me kill this and then I'll start it again because it finally ran. And if anyone was paying attention, it's like to get this running yourself. And I'll tell you some of the, well, whatever. Once I get this running, I'll tell you some of the things that suck about Acorn, like what we're trying to fix, because like there's like this is still, we've been working on this since like I started developing like kind of net zero with this around like February this year, and so we're getting I think by the end of this year, what month are we in? No, not the end of this year. We started the new year. Yeah, no, not the end of this year. So I'm trying to think. In a couple of months, like, anyways, we have KubeCon coming, so you can, conference-driven development. You'll expect some more like fancy announcements around us of like trying to fix things. But anyways, so the idea is like, I just like I want to have an experience that's more like Docker Compose. So here I can say like run in an interactive mode or a development mode, and this is much more like Docker. This is more like Docker Compose. So it's like it builds my app, and then it actually gives me like a URL that I can see. Can you see that? Yeah. Oh, oops.
Yes.
Inception.
Yeah, we see it.
So like here, I'm just running some like hello world application. Okay. So this is just a super simple app. Let me move this back over here. Okay. So this is just like a super simple app. Nothing really fancy. It's just running a web server with some static files. Let me actually show you. So it's like, since it's just running, some static files. So if I go like that saying hello world, I can go in here and there's some HTML. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to like HTML here. Default index. Sorry. Let's see. Is this the one? Hello world. So if I write this, so this. Oh wait. Let me show you a different one that's much cooler.
Okay.
Sorry, this is so like webhook demo. Let's see if this works.
This is what I love. I mean, this is like the kind of demos that I love, like it's not thought out. It's not, we didn't like spend a bunch of time on it. It's like, oh, let me just show you some cool stuff, and
yeah. So this one, so like what I was showing you before, because I probably edited the wrong file. I haven't fooled around with this one. Whatever. But this one I think is like a little better demo of like, here we can get into like a more complicated application. So it's like, here I have like a container. This is like an API layer. This is a web service layer. Here I'm actually going to run Mongo embedded, Nats and Swagger. So like this is like multiple microservices. Okay. So if I run this one kind of in a developer mode, let's see if it works. So again, it's going to go through, build all this crap. Let me break out this tab so I can kind of have both of these things running. This will take just a second to build. It's building JavaScript, which we all know is like the hardest language to compile.
While it's building for a second, I wanted to highlight just like we had a comment from somebody who said, why not use the compose interface? And I think I know the answer. I mean, the answer is that you don't end up with a Kubernetes deployable YAML.
Yeah. So the problem. So I've tried this, and yeah, I know this user. Yeah. Why not use compose? So the thing is like there's a lot of inconsistencies between compose and Kubernetes. So it's like people are saying like, why don't you use compose? Well, if I use compose, then I'm going to use a subset of compose. So then I have to educate the user on basically why can't you use all these other things that exist out there. So like there's this massive ecosystem of compose files. And so it's like, oh, like I can just pick up this compose file and run it on Acorn. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't work because, hey, they're using static IPs and that's just not a scalable production thing. I can't make that work, right? Or they're using multiple Docker networks. I can't make that work. Like there's a bunch of little concepts, unfortunately, over time that are like largely influenced, like in Docker Compose version 3 and 4, and like going forward, that started like kind of making there's these inconsistencies. So the problem is like if Compose is my primary interface, it really sucks for the user because like they're basically just going to have to educate on themselves on what doesn't work, right? So the idea is we started with kind of our own proprietary interface or whatever, and it's basically kind of like our own markup language. It's derived from Q. But it's not even, it's kind of a little different from Q. So we've started with our own. Like, I think like if people use Acorn and they're like, I wish there was compose compatibility, we'll build that. But like unfortunately the compose interface has to be secondary because it's just fundamentally incompatible with a lot of Kubernetes stuff. And I hope people kind of trust me because I've tried this so many times. If you know my history, like with Rancher, we built a system called Cattle before Kubernetes. And Cattle was very heavily embraced compose. And we tried to make that work as much as possible. And so I very much embraced compose. We actually wrote the library called libcompose, which was donated to Docker, and it was a piece of crap library and eventually rewritten so like they use something much better now. But anyways, like I've spent a massive, because like that's always like, I would just love Compose to work. And even like the more business oriented people and the co-founders or whatever, they're like, why can't you just use Compose? Like, obviously, but I'm telling you, like, it's just like, that's the dream. Like, we just kind of have to move past that to a certain degree of just like, hopefully this works. We'll see. I could be wrong.
I'll tell you from my perspective, like, I don't use Compose anywhere. I avoid it like the plague. Part of the benefit of having a home lab is I do develop on it sometimes, and so I can deploy stuff to it and use it as a native, Kubernetes environment. And my experience, I think, is better because if I try to use Compose, I end up having to do all this extra translation to try to orchestrate it that I don't want to do. And my development experience isn't that, it's not that much better anyway. And like the changes that I'm making and the things I have to deal with, I end up having to do double duty, double work to try to then translate it back into a deployment tool. So I don't like that experience.
Right.
And yeah.
And that's, so that also, you can see this is like the problem of like, well, Compose is a great developer tool, but it's a terrible ops tool. So for somebody who's like, oh, I have a home lab and I'm just running one thing, you can just run Compose yourself and just screw all of Kubernetes like that can work. But for somebody like, but then, it's like for somebody who knows Kubernetes and knows what they could do with Kubernetes, and you're like, hey, I want like Prometheus monitoring. I want like all this other stuff that I can get from Kubernetes. Like they can't mix. Right. And so that's like, we're trying to fix with Acorn. So going back to this, let me demo. So it's like, I have this app. This is like a webhook thing running or whatever. So the idea is, hopefully this works, is from a developer experience, you can go and make changes to, let me see if I can make a change and see if it actually syncs over properly. Yeah, so it's like, you can see I made a change to a file and then it syncs that over and it compiles and it refreshes, right? So you can get a decent developer experience of like, hey, this really easily runs. It's kind of like Docker Compose. It runs, I sync files, things dynamically reload. And like this works with any language that can do dynamic, can do recompilation. Like we do Go development on this, and there's like Air and other tools which detect changes. And so you can have a pretty cool, slick developer experience. But this is like where now the kind of where Acorn starts to differentiate beyond let's say something like Compose. And so now that I have this application, I can go and build this application, and I build the cloud test demo. So I can build this app now, like the same thing I was using for development. I can go and build it. And now I'm going to build it into a binary artifact, which is effectively kind of like a Docker image. I'm going to push this to a Docker repo. So now I've built this thing, and I can go and push this unauthorized Acorn login Docker IO. I build the code. Let me see. Get the password here. If you were wondering, we have all the same support for cred helpers and all that jazz and all that. Okay. What was I doing? Hub. Need to log in. Okay. Copy. Oops. Okay. Let's make sure this works now. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to go and push this. So the cool thing, who's got an audio?
That was the copy and paste.
I copied it from a password manager. Okay.
Yeah, it looked like a personal access token you probably just generated on Docker. But
so I did not type in a password. I copied that. Okay. So so what's happening is I'm pushing this image, but the cool thing about this image is it's one binary artifact that tied together. If I look at this Acorn file, you can see here I built something from a Docker file. Here I'm referencing a Mongo image, a Nats image. This one's being built from source also. Basically, so I have a couple images that are built from source. Some that are referencing external images. But when I built this Acorn image now, it pulled that all together, and it's all linked by digest and all that stuff. You can sign so it's I now have one binary artifact that describes my application. It's fully signable, and you can do all that cool stuff that ChainGuard talks about. with whatever Vex and S-bombs and but so now once I have that and I pushed it out there, I can just go to any cluster which is running Acorn, which is basically like take any Kubernetes cluster, install. You can just do Acorn install. That will install the operators. If you're like GitOps, like all of you, everyone is. Here's the Kubernetes YAML to install the system. But so I can now go and run. Oops, I forgot the image. So I can go and run this in some new app here, and just imagine like I say like -- kube config blah blah blah. I can just be pointing to like some remote cluster, and so now I'm running like the production version of this application. Okay, and so this is this really nice developer experience. It's very much just like building and running a container. This is an old version. We fixed that little bug, but under the hood, it's all still Kubernetes. Like I can say this in oops. Oh, sorry. -o YAML like that. Like it's just Kubernetes CRDs under the hood. So if like somebody understands the operational side, you can do all the GitOpsy stuff and check in YAMLs and whatnot. But like from a user, I can now just like interact with this application and say, okay, I just deployed this application. I can look at the logs of all the various components that are running in it. I get all the containers. But like, so the thing is you get this like nice Docker experience, but under the hood, this is all running on Kubernetes. And it's like all running with like Kubernetes best practices. Like, cause again, like my previous company was running Kubernetes. I know all this crap of like, so it's like, this is not a toy. So you can build production grade apps. You can run absolutely anything Kubernetes can run pretty much because we have, all the Kubernetes support. You can run persistent applications, you can run web, whatever, like all of that, but all in this super nice experience. So,
yeah.
So the thing is,
I want to bring in, to bring in this question here, Darren. So Becky was asking, why does the ecosystem need yet another Kubernetes deployment tool? And from what you've shown me, I don't feel like this is necessarily a deployment tool. It's also a deployment tool. It's really about unifying the developer experience with the deployment experience and creating kind of a single interface for that, where maybe Helm has just been lacking as far as just like, I can, if I'm building something, maybe I use Teleport, or maybe I'm editing files and rebuilding containers and redeploying. That's not a great workflow. It's really more about the workflow, right?
Yeah. And so the thing is like, you have to realize what we're building with Acorn is an application platform. It's an abstraction on top of Kubernetes. So it's like, if I go to if your day-to-day job is Kubernetes, most likely you're not going to care about Acorn. I'll tell you why you'll care about Acorn eventually. But right now you're like, well, how does this solve my Kubernetes problems? And it's like, well, if you know Kubernetes and you're running Kubernetes and you're doing like, this is not your concern. Like the problem is that the difficulty of packaging and deploying applications, that's the problem. And so where some people see that, like I'll tell you that there's kind of two things you might care about from an operations side. Is the first thing is, in any large organization, they basically have to build some type of PaaS or pipeline or something to abstract away the application teams. The application teams are allowed to touch these things, and then we create a pipeline so then it gets deployed, right? So that burden of creating that pipeline is largely coming from the more ops side, because you understand Kubernetes, you know the requirements, so you build like golden Helm templates that people are allowed, and then you come up with the processes, and they're a lot of times very manual, or maybe you're cool and you build an automated thing, but you take all that burden, okay? So that's the first thing you're going to care about, is that with Acorn, we can basically say, here's a solution that's more turnkey of like, we've thought about all the developer experience, how people are going to like, this is going to fit very well into your existing processes and stuff like that. If people package it this way, because like one of the key things of like Acorn is that like when you build, and like I built this Acorn image and then I'm deploying it, is that you should be able to have the same level of trust of the Acorn image that you would a Docker image. For example, if somebody gives you a Docker image, you're not very concerned about running that because you know it can't do too much that you don't allow it to do, right? Like A Docker, if you run it privileged, of course, it's going to do terrible things. But if you just run a Docker image, what damage can it really do to the system besides consume CPU and storage? But you can limit those things, right? So it's the same thing with an Acorn application. Is like it can only do what you're going to explicitly grant it to do, right? So that can't be said. The same thing can't be said about a Helm template. Like you have no freaking clue what a Helm template's going to, a Helm chart is going to do. Like a Helm chart, you basically just have to audit that thing, or you put in enough guardrails around it, like the RBAC policies, like my OPA policies, my whatever, you've done enough, so it's like, you can't just inherently trust a Helm chart, right? Okay, so that's the first thing as an ops side. The second thing is basically the idea is once you kind of imagine you set up Acorn can be ran in not greenfield, but imagine you do a greenfield cluster for Acorn. The only thing that's running on that cluster is Acorns, right? Is applications packaged with Acorn. The operational side of Kubernetes becomes drastically easier because you have a very standardized workload. And this standardized workload is it's kind of different from other standardizations in the past where people are like, oh, we're going to standardize the way Java apps are on Kubernetes. And it ends up being ridiculously restrictive. Acorn is not very restrictive on terms of what an application developer can accomplish, but it's very restrictive in kind of the operational tentacles, like the privileges and stuff like that. So it gives the developers a huge amount of control on what they can package. But from an operational perspective, it's a very known unit. It works in this specific way. It uses ingress and storage in this specific way. It makes operations significantly easier. So that's what I've kind of seen as I've given because it's Acorn at the end of the day, if you're hey, I want to run this Kubernetes operator and package it in Acorn, it's no, that's completely the wrong idea. We're not trying to do infrastructure admin related things use Helm, use Kustomize, do that, right? This is for packaging applications. So one of the downfalls is if I pitch Acorn to a Kubernetes team, they're well, I'm not even going to use this. And it's right, you're not going to use this. Your users are going to use this. And because your users are happier and they're doing this consistent way, it's going to make your life easier. So,
yeah,
but that's kind of,
there's, it seems like there's also sort of a benefit, improve the developer experience, B, improve the handoff experience to ops.
Yes.
And then see, hey, ops, you're going to be able to do what you need to do. And this was another comment, and Bakey, I appreciate all these comments, but he brought up, hey, a container image is just an artifact. I can just run it. I make the Helm chart. I deploy it. They don't worry about it. And that's how I do it. And I get that. And one of the things that I've seen that's kind of interesting is people are starting to consider their YAML as an artifact, right? So we're seeing people starting to create YAML or a Helm chart, and they will package it, they'll sign it, and they'll push it to a registry, and they'll say, yeah, once I view that as a package about how this thing is going to run. And I have a little bit of discomfort with that idea, but I get where people are coming from. They're saying, yeah, well, I'm versioning it, and I treat it as an artifact as well. So is that something that you see is valuable still?
Well, it's a good idea. It's just the problem is that Kubernetes is too it doesn't have Kubernetes is a very good operational platform, but at the end of the day, all of the concepts, everything in it are very infrastructure oriented, and it's you see that if let's say I go to the artifact hub or whatever and look at all the Helm charts and stuff that exists or operators that exist. They're 90% of them are all infrastructure oriented things, right? So that's fine. You can create your YAMLs as an artifact and sign them and version them and whatever. But it's at the end of the day, it's just a very the constructs and stuff is what you can do with that YAML is absolutely anything, right? And that's the problem. There's we need a proper abstraction to put it into a specific domain. And so it's like, if your task, what you're trying to do is I'm trying to manage infrastructure, then that, yes, like turn your YAML into an artifact and push that and sign it and version it. That's great. Like, because your deliverable, your asset is infrastructure oriented. But if it's application oriented, I don't think it's the right thing, because it's like the only way for me to trust that is I have to put all of these guardrails around, all of these security things in Kubernetes, and it's too much. And then on top of it, besides that, is like for someone to author those templates and stuff requires a high degree of skill to the perspective of like what we see sometimes. And it's so crazy. It's like you'll go and you'll see that there's like almost like a 20% overhead within a developer team of managing the Kubernetes deployment. So it's because it's like all the developers don't understand Kubernetes, but like within one team, you'll have a small percentage of people who understand it, who can do the create like the manifest for everyone else. But you look at it and say, like, within a developer team, I have like one guy who's almost like fully managing like that. Like that's almost his full-time job, is doing all the Kubernetes stuff. So it's like, what is your developer overhead of managing a lot? And it's way too much.
This actually brings up a point where someone is essentially saying, hey, if somebody's building a new app, they're a smaller, medium-sized business, they probably don't need Kubernetes. They should just use something easier. And I get that point, but I also, a lot of these folks, it feels like, well, okay, when I say I don't need Kubernetes, what's the barrier for me? Well, maybe it's difficult to maintain the manifest and all these kinds of things. So if I remove that barrier, if I lower it dramatically by using something maybe like Acorn, maybe the need for Kubernetes is more like, well, it's actually just more convenient to use. And I know it's going to scale with me, and I'm not going to have to do a big refactor. I might have to split up some of these containers to improve the scalability to take advantage of Kubernetes, but it's more, the primitives are there, so it's easy for me to do.
But so it's like, because the problem, because it's like, that's like, okay, so first off, if someone comes to me and they're like, I'm a small company, I'm a startup or a small business or whatever, and I want to deploy containers into production, right? I will very much tell them, don't use Kubernetes. Like it's way too much burden, right? You're going to spend more time trying to figure out Kubernetes, not focused on your core thing, right? My go-to solution for most people is ECS. Is like, go with ECS. It's the simplest thing. Maybe Cloud Run and App Runner, those things have matured and they're all right. But like,
throw a container at it, let it take care of it.
Yeah, so it's like, build a container. You can figure out a simple dev experience of building a container, and then just run the container in production. So the problem where that like falls down is the point is, it's like, so what happens is, like, inevitably people start on ECS, and then at some point they grow to a certain scale, or they have a certain level of like, they need something, some feature or something like that. And then they're like, oh, now I need to move to Kubernetes. And then that jump up is just massive. Like it is like the effort to move from ECS to Kubernetes is so much. And then like, so it's like, to me, it's like, I think there's a solution that like, where it's kind of like, can I take Kubernetes and basically scale it down to a simpler, like a simpler platform that, you can start off very easy. And then as you grow, because like what will happen is like, you can start off very easy. And then as you grow, like your Kubernetes operations, like that will scale up. And so you'll scale up and you'll do more fancy things with Kubernetes, and maybe you pull in service mesh and all this, but like, so it's like, I want to create a platform that can scale down to the small end and to the large end. And kind of the proof point to me, to a certain degree, is like K3s. It's like, what I did with K3s, and I don't take any credit for this. Like K3 was a complete accident. Like there was not like, I had some brilliant idea and created this successful project. It was just a complete accident. But like what it
you were the creator of K3s, right?
Yeah.
It was part of your CTO at Rancher role as you created this K3s, and you said it was an accident.
Yeah. So it's like, basically, because I quickly mentioned another platform I created, Rio. which was a failed experiment at Rancher, which was trying to orient more towards application developers. And so when I was building Rio, well, like one of the major problems was like I needed Kubernetes. Like how the hell do I run Kubernetes easily on my laptop? I could do Minikube and all that stuff, but I just wasn't happy with the experience.
Yeah.
So at that time, I created this open source project that was initially what K3s initially was like, because if you go way back in the commits, you'll actually find this in the README. It was like Kubernetes with the crap I don't care about. So I just took Kubernetes, stripped out all the stuff I didn't want, made it small and fast to start up, so I could just run it more like a program. Like as easy it is to run the Docker daemon, I wanted to make it as easy to run Kubernetes for development. Like, and I did that. And so like I was doing that as a developer thing just to make Rio, so I could build Rio. And then like as I was doing more things day to day, I'm like, dude, this is just the nicest way I have to run Kubernetes. So then I started just like, I kind of threw it out there on Twitter of like, hey, is anyone interested in like, what if I take like Kubernetes, but make it as easy to run as Docker Swarm? Because that, you know, Docker Swarm obviously has like gone down in popularity, but whatever. Yeah. But like at the time it was like, it was known for being just really easy to get up and running.
Yeah. And in the home lab community, it's like got this whole second life. It's very popular.
Yeah. Yeah, it still is popular. And you can see that with Portainer too. Like Portainer has a huge business still on Swarm. And so with K3s, it was kind of, that was like, hey, what if I create like just a super, like kind of like slimmed down version of Kubernetes that's really easy to run. But the thing that was different about K3s than any other kind of microgates is a real thing. Any other small developer focused Kubernetes was I wanted K3s to actually be more production oriented, which was like, I can run a 3-node cluster. This is not a toy. Like this is like, you can actually, like, it's not just something for your laptop. So anyway, so I put,
and I'll tell you, K3s really enabled me to start my home lab journey. So you can see I've got 3 nodes back here. These are my big worker nodes, but I started with Atomic Pis, which only have 2 gigs of RAM. And I was running like Plex on this thing, you know, and I was able to do that because K3s was so lightweight and it was just so easy to operate. And it comes with great tools. Like you've got the version manager built in, so I can, you know, actually do GitOps. I have Argo CD running this thing. I can update the version in Git. It'll automatically update the K3s version. So this really enabled me to do a lot of that orchestration. And then from the folks I've talked to, I mean, we had, I think 2 episodes ago, we had some Rancher folks on, and we were just talking about edge use cases. And we've got you know, Chick-fil-A is out there, and you've got Starbucks and all these folks. And K3s is kind of the go-to because, like etcd is awesome, especially when I need 5,000 nodes in a cluster. Yeah, most of the time I don't need 5,000 nodes in a cluster. Especially if I'm doing edge, I can get away with these much slimmer, lower memory footprint, you know, distribution like K3s.
And so like there's the cool thing that happened with, so it's like all this was just an accident. So like when we put out K3s, that like I started getting all this feedback of like people were like, hey, this is the first time I actually was able to run Kubernetes and like get something working. Like I've read all these things and tried Minikube and like had these issues. Like this is the first time, because like one of the differences between K3s and a lot of others was that we're like, we want all the APIs to work out of the box. Like we want ingress, we want a storage control. Like we want all the APIs, the key APIs to work. Like, whereas like, you know, all the other distributions at the time, you know, it's like you had to install the ingress controller. You
always had something that wouldn't. And microgates, especially for a very long time, had a lot of stuff that just didn't work, that you couldn't use.
Yeah, and so it's like it was like when we first put it out, like our benchmark, it was like, can I run Istio on it? Because like, you know, Istio, like it's gotten better over time, but back then it was like a ridiculous complicated beast that like used everything, every API, and it was like, can I run Istio? And so like we wanted to make sure that like, and that's also why like K3s went for like CNCF certification of like, is like, we're like, no, like this is a full Kubernetes cluster. We didn't like take anything out. But anyways, but so if you look at K3s, was like we were able to take this like ridiculously complicated Kubernetes thing that's impossible to operate and scale it down to something that somebody can run on 3 nodes fairly confidently, right? So I think Kubernetes can be a solution that can be scaled down to the smaller user, right? So like right now, like my go-to, as I was saying, is like I tell small people, like small time, to like go like with ECS or some run a container platform, and then eventually get to Kubernetes. But it's like, no, we should be able to scale Kubernetes down. But I think a lot of that has to do with the kind of the burden that Kubernetes puts on the end user who wants to just package and run an application. So Acorn's trying to address that.
Yeah, that's a good segue to bring in another question from Bakey, who asks, how effective can developers be with Acorn if they don't care about Kubernetes? Can I, as an SRE DevOps guy, just template stuff to abstract Kubernetes away from them? And from the experience you showed me, I didn't feel like I had to really know anything about Kubernetes. It felt like I was saying container, expose, I've got a couple of containers, rock and roll.
Yeah, so that's like the goal of Acorn right now. So like basically what like right now, like if I want to use Acorn today, like we're trying to make it such that you really need zero Kubernetes knowledge to like build an application, run it, like make it like need no Kubernetes. Okay. The big problem with that is obviously I still need Kubernetes in production. How the hell do I get Kubernetes in production? Right. Mm-hmm. So if you have the luxury of having a Kubernetes team, then they can provide that. Right. So Acorn, and you already have an operations team that can do that. Then you can have pretty much a full experience of like, they just pick up Acorn, they use it. And again, this is a alpha. We're entering kind of more of a beta stage with Acorn, but it's still alpha. So it's like, I'm talking about aspirationally, but like we're getting very much to the point where like you can run Acorn with knowing almost no Kubernetes knowledge. But like right now, the Kubernetes crap still bleeds through because this doesn't work. You got to poke around. But anyways, so the idea is that like, if you have somebody who can manage the Kubernetes operations side, then the user of Acorn and deploying apps and putting them into production and having visibility and whatnot, you don't need any Kubernetes knowledge for that. So what Acorn, like what we're doing right now is we're strengthening that abstraction to ensure that there's no Kubernetes, like you can really live in the Acorn abstraction if I just care about running applications. But then we're trying to make the operation side even easier. Like if you already have operations, that's great. But what about for the user who's just coming in and it's like, like somebody who would be geared more towards like Heroku? Like how do you make like that work? And so we're doing a lot on the operation side of like, how do we actually just make like, if my goal is just to run an Acorn application, how do I make that operation side just turnkey? Right. So then for that user who doesn't care about the rest of the Kubernetes ecosystem, the operation side's turnkey. But for the user who does care about the Kubernetes ecosystem, they still have all the flexibility to do all the madness that Kubernetes allows you to do. So, it's an ongoing project, and, obviously expect some announcements around KubeCon time about what we'll be doing.
So I want to highlight one more question, then I want to go a little bit higher level. So this one question was, can Acorn abstract the CRDs or operators that may already be deployed? Or is this something that's on the roadmap?
Okay, so you have to look at this from an application perspective. So we get this a lot because like that's the very first thing any Kubernetes person is like, how do I do CRDs, right? Okay, so think about that at the end of the day. Like what does a CRD mean to somebody who's packaging an application, right? A lot of the times the CRDs that you want, they have a lot more to do with operations. And so that's one class. They have a lot more to do with operations. So we are working more on the administrator side of like, how do I inject CRDs and modify the application to inject, some of the crap that I need from the admin side. So that's all leveraging largely just native Kubernetes stuff. There's a lot of things you can do with Kubernetes to augment things. Okay. But from the user side, like why do they care about CRDs? A lot of the time it's basically, I want to consume or create some type of service, right? Because an operator, one of the big use cases of an operator is to run persistent services. So we're looking at this perspective so there's two sides of it that I'm basically describing. From the Acorn side, we're building out a framework which has a lot more to do with basically kind of like creating, managing, consuming external services. Under the hood, that's going to be leveraging a lot of operator and CRD technology to make that happen, right? So from an admin side, you're like, I install this operator and I have these CRDs, and then there's a little bit of magic to configure an Acorn, and then it can expose it to the end user as like a service they can consume. so they're not going to be writing CRDs directly because like that's not their end goal. Like they don't care about a CRD, they care about what they want to get to. So that's the user side. Then from the admin side, like the ability to basically kind of inject and do all these other things. We're working on that.
Let's say I'm using Argo rollouts to handle Canary releases, right? So I actually, I could generate a deployment and then I can have a rollout consume those deployments, or I can generate a rollout directly. For me, most of the time I end up just, if I'm writing it, I just write the rollout directly. Could I do something like that using Acorn?
So progressive delivery, like those type of things, like so that's where you get into a very gray area because
right, very much that's an operations concern. It's not locally, I don't care about that.
So it's an operation concern, but it's very dictated on the application. The application has to describe certain things for something like that to work, right? What are my metrics endpoints or the health checks or whatever? So like there's kind of this marry in the middle or whatever. So it's like, so progressive delivery is something where it's like, that one is a little bit of a gray area of like, it makes sense that we need to look at that kind of first class of like build that one into kind of the Acorn, probably the Acorn experience, but I already put this out today or whatever, is that like it's very easy. Like I don't know Acorn, like I don't know Acorn rollouts very well, but I like more Flagger. I've done Flagger. I might like I'm going into like I might sound like an idiot and say the wrong thing here, or whatever. But like because I've looked at this specifically is like what you can do with Acorn, for example, is like when you deploy an application, you can just put the replicas as like basically, or the scale we call it, but that turns into deployment replicas. You can just put that like, just don't set it, right?
Yeah.
So what that allows you to do is like, if you have something like Flagger in place, you can have Flagger actually just manage the rollout of that because it does the cloning of the deployment and then does or whatever.
Okay, so it's basically a separation of concerns at that point.
Right. So that's what we're trying to do is like I want to leverage the whole ecosystem. And so it's like, so I don't like, so the rollout one is like, I think it's possible because I've looked at Flagger a bit of like, and I haven't fully done this end to end, but like, it looks like initially that it's like, well, no, I think I can just kind of bring in Flagger and largely would just work because at the end of the day, the key thing about Acorn is like, we very much wanted it so that like when we create the assets, like because Acorn, it takes the Acorn metadata and at runtime turns it into Kubernetes resources. That's really important. At runtime, we turn it into Kubernetes resources, not like Helm where it's kind of like, like Helm, there's no dynamic behavior basically. It's like, just spits out a YAML and then applies it. We're doing it more dynamic. And so the reason why we're doing that is we can tailor it to the deployment, like to the target environment. So it's like you build the application, it has the high level application manifest, and then depending on the runtime environment, we can tweak it and do things like service mesh integration or whatnot. But
and the Acorn controller doesn't have a concept of like Git as a source of truth. It's, hey, whatever's deployed into the cluster, this is what I'm going to deal with, and I'm going to operate as a controller here. So if I was using let's say that I am an Argo CD shop, right? Everything I do, I deploy and manage using Argo CD. I've got my dashboards, and actually I use CodeFresh, so I have like these like way souped up dashboards and insights and all these things. So if I wanted to use this with Argo CD, and it's funny to think of a traditional GitOps structure.
Exactly.
It's like a year and a half old. If I wanted to use this with a kind of traditional approach, it sounds like essentially what I would do is I would have maybe a CI/CD pipeline that ran Acorn to render manifests and commit them to a repo where I would then get them consumed. Is there a shortcut, better way that I should approach that?
Yeah, so that's the thing is because like that's specifically like kind of not what Acorn does, because like if we do that, you have a lot of complexities of like, well, what if those manifests are different depending on the target environments? And then so what we specifically do here, if I share my screen, or I think I'm still sharing.
Oh yeah, I can put it up.
If you want to show it here, is what you're going to do is because like when I build this application, and so I said Acorn run. Basically this spits out this CRD. Like, so this is like kind of like the very simple hello world. So it's pointing to the Docker image. So This is what you actually put into CI. So you just put into GitOps. You just put this CRD. Okay. So you put this CRD, and then this is like basically just like a Docker image. So if you're doing things like with I know with like Flux and other systems or whatever, it can basically look for like new images and then update the GitOps, the Git source. And so this is what you're going to check in. So from a kind of like so from the GitOps side, you're just going to basically put this in. And then from like the CI pipeline and stuff, you're just going to create a workflow, which is like this is on tag, where basically we're doing like you check out the source. These are some actions we have where like basically you set up and log in. And then here you can see we just do build and push. So your CI pipeline, so like look at this more like building a Docker image, right? So your application looks more like a Docker image. So like you set up your CI pipeline to basically build Acorn images, and then you set up your GitOps pipeline that has a CRD, which points to the image you built and any other type of information. Because it's like when I do Acorn run here, I'll show you. There's a lot of things in here that are more deployment specific, which is like expose or ports. This is all mapping like how you want to expose the application, the ports or whatever. There's binding in secrets. There's what target namespace you want to actually run it in, binding in volumes. So this is all more of the operation. So it's like if I do something like this and I say, okay, here I want to bind in this secret that I've delivered through some other GitOps mechanism. I want this secret called ASDF to be used as foo. Like this binds in that secret. Yeah. Or if I don't think this will work, so it'll probably fail. Let me see if I say like test true or something like that. Yeah, it says unknown flag. Let me see if I have any flags on this application. Oh yeah, here you go. Mongo URL, whatever. So this puts the deploy args. So it's kind of like you have this very simple high-level manifest that you can describe the application. So like that's what the whole pipeline would look like. Is like on the one side you build and push your applications as Acorn images, and then on the GitOps side you're just basically updating this one CRD. So it's just super easy. But going back, there was like a point I was trying to make with like the way we generate resources and stuff is like under the hood, the way these applications are running. Like if I go into Kubernetes and I just look at like the namespace where wait, do I actually have something running? A new app, okay. So if I look at like the namespace new app, this is where the app is running. I look at deployments, like they're just regular deployments. I look at service, they're like regular services. There's some ingress in here. There's some PVCs. The resources we generate under the hood are just standard Kubernetes stuff. It's not kind of like Knative where it's like this really, I don't know, Knative.
It's its own thing, yeah. No, yeah, like you showed earlier that there was a command line argument where I could literally output the Kubernetes manifests. So if I wanted to output those.
So that was for installation though. Okay, so that was for installation. If I just want to install, so this is like if I want to install Acorn, the platform, like the operator, then you can just do this. And then this is like all the crap that we need to actually run.
I can't just output the YAML for my app.
No. And so like, it's very important. Like this is a key differential because it's like, that's where a lot of the complexity actually comes from something like Helm. Because when you create a Helm chart, which like a Helm chart, you can, it doesn't fully work, but you can do Helm template, output the YAML and you can check it in. Or people do flows where it's like, you tack in customize at the end, But the problem is like that chart, what you're doing is you're mixing all of the application information with the infrastructure information. So if the application changes or the infrastructure changes, that chart has to change and it has to be adapted for every target environment. That's where customize comes in, right? So that's why a lot of people, what they do is like, instead of trying to add all these things to the Helm values YAML, they tack in customize because they can just do whatever the heck they want. They can
this is exactly what I do because I hate parameterizing every part of a Helm chart. It's irritating.
Right. So the idea is with Acorn is like we build basically a better platform where like from the application side, I just have application metadata. Like I just care about describing the application. And then if you're running the Acorn operator, I can take that application metadata and then turn it into Kubernetes resources at that time that are tailored to that environment. So it's like, because there's a lot of flexibility on the Acorn administrator operator side of like, like the simplest deployment of Acorn just, kind of works on a vanilla Kubernetes cluster. But if you want to bring in like different monitoring and logging and security and storage and ingress and all that stuff, there's a lot more you can do on the operator side to start tweaking all of that. And so like we're building kind of all of those hooks and everything so you can accomplish everything you want on the operator side. So it's really important that we render those manifests at runtime. So because we get this a lot, because people are like, well, I want to know exactly what changes. So tell me exactly the YAML before. And it's like, well, I understand like that's your concern, but like look at an operator today, like any other Kubernetes operator. Like a Kubernetes operator is live changing things or whatever. And the reason why you accept that is because you effectively trust the operator. You know the CRD, the input, and then you trust the operator. Acorn works in a similar way. Like the input, and this is the behavior of the system, how it works, and we're going to be dynamically creating resources. But yeah.
So actually, maybe one more question, and then we'll kind of move on to a broader topic. But so Nick Knack was asking, dev experience can be improved in Kubernetes, but don't you think dev is overloaded?
Yeah, and I touched on this a little bit earlier. It's like I hate the term developers because it's like I identify as a developer, right? But I'm not. I already know like I'm not the same as most developers. It's like I live in Arizona, and the development community here, like our tech community, is growing. But like, I'll go and meet someone and they're like, hey, I'm a developer. And I'm like, cool. Like, what do you do? I do Go. And they're like, I do SQL Server. And it's like, oh, that's yeah, right. So
it's that meme. Is this development?
I don't know.
Database administrator. It's not that it's not important. It's just, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, no. So because that's the thing. It's like no, but like because there is actual like development, like you're developing stored procedures and stuff in SQL developer, like in SQL Server, and so like that's a develop. That's a perfectly. It's kind of like what is that? Like one of those arguments is HTML a programming language?
Right.
It's kind of like and it's like you do you. It's fine. But so
I don't know, man. The acronym has language in it. What do I do with that information?
I'll take the controversial stance and say no, it is not. No, I'm just joking. So, but that's the thing is like, so I think what a developer is in the end, and like, is that it's too overloaded, and so like I I think that common system of a data scientist. Like I love the use case of data scientists. Like they're a perfect use case where it's like these people like they're not like your programmer, but they're like using Python and stuff, and they just want to get their job done. They don't give a crap about. It's like I'm very knowledgeable and skilled in this area, and I have to then write some code to do things, but the rest of the crap I don't care about. And so that's where it's important that like this is why I hate PaaS platforms. Is PaaS platforms typically go too far of narrowing in on a use case, which is like a Heroku user or a Java user or something like that. They very narrow and they accelerate that one use case, but then it doesn't go much larger. So I look at Docker and I say, Docker is a very decent, like if I use Docker as my abstraction layer of like, I can create a Docker container, like that's my level of skill. I can create a Docker container. That's where I kind of say where Acorn picks up. It's like, I want to be able to run a container and multiple containers and do microservices and stuff, but I don't really care about how it runs. Like that's where kind of the Acorn abstraction sits. So it's like the end user of Acorn is like, I hate saying it's like a developer, but that's kind of where the industry puts it, is like the people who kind of create the artifacts that go in the container are more the developer, but yeah, so it's what. So I think it's overloaded. I don't know a better term than saying developers, but yeah, that's the kind of.
So I think it's very cool, and thank you for giving us the demo and showing us around. I know you were like, oh, we probably wouldn't even talk about this, and we were like, oh, we've been over an hour and like 20 minutes on it, so we've actually done pretty well. So I wanted to ask you, I had thought of something else. So Monty Python now for something completely different.
Okay.
I was thinking about something that you started talking about in the very beginning when you were talking about kind of the rise of K3s, and we were talking about Docker Compose. And from a CodeFresh perspective, we started our company when it was very much unclear what the container orchestrator was going to be. And so people were thinking Docker Swarm, people were thinking maybe this Kubernetes thing that was just starting to, like, Google was just, I think they announced it even after, they launched it after CodeFresh had launched. So we were kind of container native, and we were figuring out what that meant from an orchestration layer. And we decided very early on that we were going to make a big bet on Kubernetes. And one of the things that we had in our mindset was, we think that Amazon is going to offer Kubernetes. We think that the other, we think Microsoft is going to do it. And one of the things that we actually sat around in our conference room, which was a house, at the time, was we think Rancher is going to go Kubernetes. And that was the really controversial statement, because it was like, no, Rancher, they've got their own orchestrator that they're going to push, and there's no way they'd ever give up on that. So I was curious, and we're coming up on time, but I wanted to ask you, with kind of the last few minutes, what was that like? Like, what was that experience like? Was it like painful to decide that? Because OpenShift did the same thing. They went and said, you know what, we're going to make our whole platform re-architect on Kubernetes. What was the experience like at Rancher?
Oh my gosh, I could go on quite a while about that decision. So I want to make it clear, like, I was 100% on board with completely pivoting to Kubernetes. So I'll tell you, like, the kind of like some of the, like, so what happened there is, like, we had cattle that we built as an accident. We were very close with Docker in the beginning, but Docker was like, you couldn't really realistically run it on servers, like multiple servers. It wasn't, cross servers, like only worked for one host. So we built cattle with the idea of, like, this is where we think Docker is going, and hopefully they'll get there and we'll throw it away. Docker never really got there, and then cattle kind of took on its own life, and then we built up the thing around it, but we never really wanted to build an orchestrator. So then Kubernetes came around, and I mean, I've said this before, whatever. I remember Alex Polvey, CoreOS CEO, CoreOS, like, Kubernetes came out, and he asked me, he's like, "Oh, what do you think of it?" And I'm like, "It's way too complicated. It'll never catch on." Right? So I was not a fan of Kubernetes in the beginning, right? Because it was so ridiculously complicated. Yeah. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out and accept Kubernetes for what it was, because, like, cattle was very oriented towards the end user of packaging and running applications. Kubernetes is very oriented towards the operator of trying to create a scalable platform. But anyways, so what happened is, like, we're like, we need to embrace Kubernetes. So we rewrote Rancher, and this was and we did this. It was Rancher 2.0 Tech Preview 1. We rewrote, and I rewrote cattle. It was still all in Java. I rewrote cattle to then include Kubernetes. And we did this whole platform, and this was our solution to doing Kubernetes. And it was like this Java kind of managing Kubernetes, and it was a weird thing or whatever. But, like, we put that as a Tech Preview 1. We put that out there, and then we realized, like, no. Like, this doesn't make sense. We need to go further into Kubernetes. So I spent 6 months building that, like, Tech Preview 1, and then I threw it away, and then rewrote Rancher as, like, completely operators, 100% Kubernetes, try to embrace Kubernetes to its fullest. That experience was so ridiculously difficult. It was so hard, like, because there was just a lot of things of, like, everything in Kubernetes sucked at that time. Like, nothing worked right. This is before CRDs existed. Like, that was like, right. So it was like, there was no clients for anything. And, like, so, but anyways,
dude, storage nightmare.
Yeah, everything was terrible, right? So you can understand, of, like, we built this really cool platform that users loved. Like, we had a lot of users who loved cattle, but we knew, like, the writing was on the wall. We knew it. Like, we had to switch to Kubernetes. And so we really committed ourselves, like, we're going to do this, but it sucked. It was so hard because the state of Kubernetes. It was just like, we went from this great product, Rancher 1.6, a lot of people loved that, to Rancher 2, which really reflected the Kubernetes ecosystem, which was like everything so difficult. It's just so anyway. So
well, and I bet in many ways Rancher 1 was superior to the initial Kubernetes offering in some of the things you could do.
Yeah, like, and when that's what happened is like, so this is what it took us a while to realize is like we effectively, because like our pivot to Kubernetes was also a pivot into completely changing what the product was, because Cattle really enabled like people to package applications and run them. Rancher 2, which was the product that actually, we really made the company, was cluster administration. It was helping people run clusters. So our end user switched. And like that really sucked from a company and all this perspective of like, luckily, like a lot of our users were, nice and understood, and it was like clear the industry. So it was kind of like we were all in it together of like, well, we all got to do Kubernetes. So this is the right way to go. This is what makes sense. But it was difficult. Here we are many years later. A lot of that's improved. So it's like the stuff that I can complain about, like just like we spent so much time just dealing with getting etcd to run. That's where the K3s runs on top of SQLite, right?
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time developing that SQLite backend. Like you have no idea the amount of time I reverse engineered Kubernetes to figure out how to run it on SQLite, because nobody else had really accomplished doing a different storage backend and one that's based on a traditional database, not a key value store. So, but the whole reason why I wrote that SQLite backend to begin with was I was so fed up with etcd. Like it was so difficult to operate. Like now it's a whole different story. It's a lot better these days. But in those early days, I mean, that was like 80% of our work was just operating Kubernetes for people. Operating etcd for people. Did I say etcd? I don't know if I was saying the right thing, but like etcd, like, but anyways. So yeah, so that whole experience, like, it's like now I can look back and laugh at it, but it was so ridiculously hard to do that. But we knew it was the right thing to do. Like the writing was on the wall. Like that's what we did. And then in the end it paid off. And so it's like, and I, at the end of the day, as much as I complain about Kubernetes, I think it's an incredibly good technology. I'm very happy with the success of it. I think it's a mainstay technology. Like, I mean, I think it's like, it's going to be something like, it's kind of like more like Java. Like we're all going to kind of learn to hate it, but it drives enterprise, So it's like, it's going to stick around. I would like to see Kubernetes, the benefits of Kubernetes, not just be for enterprise, to kind of get down to more of the mass market of people who just want to build and run applications.
I agree with that. I know a lot of people say, hey, you're too small. Don't use Kubernetes. It's too complicated. But it's like if you try to do the stuff that Kubernetes is good at anywhere else, it's so much harder. It's so much harder to solve Kubernetes problems without Kubernetes. And so I would love it if we just got it even more accessible, easier. And that's, that's part of what we're trying to do with GitOps. That's part of what we're trying to do with Argo. It's part of what we're trying to do with CodeFresh, is just making it easier and more accessible. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that's kind of what you're trying to do with Acorn too.
Yeah. And I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. I really do. Because I think, as we figure out, it's like, as we figure out the workloads and the patterns and whatever, we will standardize these things, kind of commoditize it, and then it's like, and then it'll become more accessible. And so I see a very bright future for Kubernetes.
Yeah.
But that future is not people touching Kubernetes. I really think we're getting to the point that we are doing what it was initially designed to do, which is to be abstracted, to be the layer at the bottom, and people can interact with the systems above it. And then Kubernetes can still power this. It's a great platform, but we don't all need to be touching it directly.
Darren, this time has flown like crazy, and I feel like maybe the very end of this stream is maybe a preview for a part 2. I think we're gonna have you back on.
Yeah, I can talk forever
of the container ecosystem, because it's fascinating and it's really fun to hear your perspective.
Yeah, and this is fun. I enjoyed it. I love these things. If anyone else is watching and they have their own live stream thing, I love to come on and chat about this stuff.
So as we come to a close, we always tell people, hey, go get GitOps certified. CodeFresh has the most popular GitOps certification in the world. We've got over 18,000 students. It's learning.codefresh.io, or just go to codefresh.io. You'll see a link. Join our Discord, the GitOps champions. They're over here discussing in Discord, and we've got this growing community of people who are focused on deploying software using GitOps. Darren, obviously acorn.io. Anything else you want to pitch? Anything coming up that people should be aware of?
No, we just released 0.5 of Acorn. That just came out yesterday. But just go to acorn.io. Like, please just try it out, run it. If it sucks, let us know. Like, the most valuable thing is just feedback. We want to know, if you're not, like, if you see no value in it, I would love to hear why. If you see value in it, I would love to hear why. We want people to try it out and give us feedback. So.
All right. Well, that's a great call to action. Darren, make sure to stick around. I'm going to end the broadcast, but thanks everybody for coming.
Sure.
This was GitOps the Planet episode 6. Next week, episode 7. I think we have Victor Farsick coming to talk about Crossplane. So that's going to be really fun. So don't miss that episode. Thanks, everybody. Take care.